10 Forgotten Canadian Beers We Want Back. Canada had a beer culture that the world respected. Brands with decades of history, regional identity, and recipes passed down through generations of master brewers. Before the First World War, Canada boasted 117 independent breweries, each one carrying the pride of its city, its province, and its people. Today, most of those brands are gone, merged, discontinued, erased, and the generation that drank them is the last one that remembers. These are 10 forgotten Canadian beers we want back. Labatt 50 Ale. There was a time in Canada when you didn't ask what someone was drinking. You already knew. It was a 50. A cold, golden, beautifully simple Labatt 50 Ale, and for over a decade, it sat comfortably at the top of every fridge, every bar, and every hockey arena in the country. John and Hugh Labatt, grandsons of founder John K. Labatt, launched Labatt 50 in 1950 to commemorate 50 years of partnership. The first light-tasting ale introduced in Canada, it was fermented using a special ale yeast in use at Labatt since 1933, with specially selected North American hops delivering a good balance of dryness, complemented by a fruity taste. Canadians didn't just drink it, they claimed it. From 1968 to 1979, Labatt 50 was Canada's #1 selling beer. 11 consecutive years at the top. People had ad jingles memorized. Me and the boys and our 50, me and the boys and our beer. That wasn't just marketing, that was Saturday night in every province from BC to New Brunswick. In Quebec, it became something deeper than a beer. It became a symbol. It spoke of the toil of Quebec and the tenacity of its working classes, found in dépanneurs at Grand Prix weekends, in the hands of a generation that built the country with their bare hands and rewarded themselves honestly. Then lagers rose. In 1979, with the increasing popularity of lagers, Labatt 50 was surpassed by Labatt Blue. The suits redirected. The marketing money moved. And one of the greatest ales Canada ever produced quietly faded from the national conversation. Not because it was bad, but because the industry stopped believing in it. But if Labatt 50's decline was slow and quiet, the next beer on our list didn't fade at all. It was erased overnight by a scandal so shocking it made front-page headlines from Montreal to Vancouver. Dow Ale. Before the scandal, before the headlines, before the whispers, Dow Ale was simply the beer of Quebec. William Dow founded the brewery in 1861 in Montreal, building on a brewing tradition that traced back to 1790. For over a century, Dow Ale grew into something Quebec didn't just drink, it cherished. By the mid-1960s, Dow Ale was the #1 selling beer in Quebec. That is an extraordinary achievement in a province that took its beer as seriously as its culture. Then, August 1965 arrived, and everything changed. A person presented to a hospital in Quebec City with symptoms suggestive of alcoholic cardiomyopathy. Over the next 8 months, 50 more cases with similar findings appeared in the same area. 20 of these were fatal. Doctors were baffled. Communities were terrified. And then investigators found the thread connecting every single case. Dow had been adding cobalt sulfate to its beer for foam stability since July 1965. And the concentration added in the Quebec City brewery was 10 times that of the same beer brewed in Montreal, where there were no reported cases. 10 times the same beer. One city destroyed by it while another drank it safely. Dow tried to rectify the situation by dumping the remaining contaminated ale. But people saw this act as a recognition of guilt, and in only 1 year, Dow Brewery lost nearly all its market share in Quebec. The following year, in 1967, the brewery was sold to O'Keeffe. The brand limped through corporate mergers until its brands were formally discontinued in 1997. By then, as one Toronto drinker bluntly remembered, Dow, the beer that kills. A century of brewing, a summer of decisions, gone forever. But if Dow Ale was erased by scandal, the next beer on our list was erased by something far more Canadian. A corporate merger that quietly swallowed an entire generation's favorite pint without a single apology. Old Vienna OV. Old Vienna started in the mid-1930s as a brand of O'Keeffe Brewery in Toronto, under E.P. Taylor's Canadian Breweries Limited. It was a traditional German-style lager, 5% alcohol with a mildly citrus smell and a clear pale golden look, unpretentious, honest, and exactly what Canadians wanted after a long shift or a longer week. Ads from the era carried the phrase, "a touch of the brewmaster's genius," and people believed it because the beer earned it. Through the 1960s and 1970s, OV wasn't just popular, it was everywhere. It became the main lager produced by Carling O'Keefe and was brewed in Montreal, St. John's, Toronto, Edmonton, and Vancouver, coast to coast. A beer that belonged to all of Canada equally, which was a rarer thing than it sounds. Then came 1989. Molson and Carling O'Keefe merged, giving the combined company 53% of the Canadian beer market, and breweries in 7 provinces were closed as a result. OV survived the merger on paper, but the soul of it, the regional pride, the local breweries, the connection to the communities that made it theirs, that was gone. In 1987, Elders de Fred XL purchased Carling O'Keefe and then merged with Molson in 1989. In 2005, Molson merged with Coors to become Molson Coors. Today, OV still technically exists, buried on discount shelves, largely invisible to anyone under 40, a ghost wearing a familiar label. Still, nothing about OV's disappearance was explosive. The next beer on our list, however, didn't just vanish quietly, it arrived like nothing Canada had ever tasted before, built a cult following that crossed borders, and then dissolved without so much as a farewell round. 4. Molson Brador. Some beers quench your thirst. Molson Brador had a reputation. And in Canada, during the 1970s and 1980s, that reputation traveled faster than any advertising campaign Molson ever ran. Brador was first released in 1971, and its name, as noted by World Beer Authority Michael Jackson, was a contraction of Brassée d'Or, meaning brewed in gold. That name wasn't accidental. This was Molson's statement beer, a top fermenting ale at a striking 6.2% ABV, more than a full percentage point above everything else on the shelf. It arrived wrapped in gold foil and carrying a quiet confidence that said, "This is not your ordinary Friday night beer." Initially available only in Quebec, Brador didn't need national distribution to build national desire. In Ontario, word spread fast. High school students heard about this beer from Molson in Quebec, and by the time they were old enough to drink, it was already legendary. Americans made border runs for it. College students drove to Canada specifically to bring cases back across, and that cult following extended all the way into New York State. Michael Jackson described it warmly in his 1982 Pocket Guide to Beer, and Canadian beer writer Steve Beaumont called it pale gold-colored, with a sweet, roasted, and faintly smoky nose. For a domestic Canadian beer in that era, that kind of recognition was almost unheard of. Then the suits got involved. The alcohol quietly dropped from 6.2% to 6%, and by its final years, Brador had developed a generic mass-market taste, a shadow of what people remembered. It disappeared without a formal goodbye, without a farewell campaign, without a single headline. It was a classic beer, well worth revitalizing. There are a lot of fans who still desire the flavor of Brador. Molson just never listened. Even so, Brador at least had a golden era worth mourning. The next beer on our list was ahead of its time from day one, premium, proud, and poured into one of the most distinctive bottles Canada ever saw, yet it never got the recognition it deserved. Heidelberg Beer. Pick up a Heidelberg bottle today if you can even find one, and you'll understand immediately why people kept them. Released by Carling O'Keefe in a grenade-shaped bottle in the early 1970s, Heidelberg didn't just stand out on the shelf, it made every other bottle in the fridge look ordinary. That shape alone told you something different was inside, and different it genuinely was. The label read, "Fine quality beer from choicest hops and malt and pure spring water." Words that sound simple until you remember that most Canadian beers of that era were adjunct lagers that never made such a promise. Brewed at 5% ABV and distributed from Vancouver, Calgary, Saskatoon, Winnipeg, Toronto, Montreal, and St. John's, coast to coast in every major Canadian city, Heidelberg had national reach with a premium soul. What makes Heidelberg especially fascinating is its split identity. It was initially an ale in Quebec and Ontario, and when launched in Western Canada, it was a lager, because the West was always lagerland. One beer, two personalities, tailored to the country it served. That kind of thoughtfulness was rare then and is rare now. Then came the stubby bottle standardization push, and Heidelberg paid dearly for it. After being forced to adopt the standard industry stubby bottle, sales dropped and the brand left the market. The grenade bottle wasn't just packaging, it was the entire personality of the beer. Strip it away, and Heidelberg became just another stubby on a shelf full of stubbies. Today, only 3 Carling O'Keefe brands survive under Molson Coors, Carling Lager, Carling Black Label, and O'Keefe's. Heidelberg is not among them, not even a footnote. And yet, as forgotten as Heidelberg is today, the next beer on our list had an even shorter run. Born at exactly the right moment in Canadian brewing history, killed at exactly the wrong one, and gone before most of Canada ever got the chance to raise a glass. Upper Canada Rebellion Lager. The name alone tells you everything. Rebellion. In 1987, when every major Canadian brewery was playing it safe with thin adjunct lagers and national distribution deals, Upper Canada Brewing released Rebellion, a strong lager commemorating the 1837 Rebellion of Upper Canada. That wasn't just a beer name, that was a statement. Founded by Frank Heaps and Larry Sherwood in Toronto. In 1985, Upper Canada grew to become one of the largest independent breweries in Canada. At a time when Molson and Labatt controlled virtually everything Canadians drank, that independence meant something real. Their brewery at 2 Atlantic Avenue in Toronto included a gift shop that allowed them to sell alcohol on Sundays, something Ontario's beer store monopoly was not permitted to do. People lined up for it, on a Sunday, for craft beer. In 1985, Rebellion poured a dark gold with a crisp medium body, malty and grainy with an alcohol presence that reviewers described as making you thank the lager gods. At 6% ABV, it had genuine backbone. It was one of the beers most obviously different from Molson Export or Labatt Blue, and Toronto knew it, cherished it, and made it a benchmark of what local independent brewing could achieve. Then Sleeman purchased Upper Canada in 1998 for $28 million, closed the Toronto brewery, moved operations to Guelph, and reduced the Upper Canada product line because it competed with Sleeman's own brands. Rebellion Lager was among the beers subsequently discontinued. The co-founders of Steam Whistle, Cam Heaps, Greg Taylor, and Greg Cromwell were all Upper Canada alumni, and the sale to Sleeman was a big part of what pushed them to start their own operation. Rebellion died. Steam Whistle was born. Canada got one great brewery and lost another. Yet as heartbreaking as Rebellion's story is, the next beer on our list carries a history far older, far deeper, and far more foundational. A brand that didn't just participate in Canadian brewing, it helped invent it. If this list brought back a memory, a name, or a face, hit subscribe, drop a like, and tell us in the comments which beer you missed the most. O'Keefe Ale. Some brands build a legacy. O'Keefe Ale didn't just build one, it helped build an entire industry. Eugene O'Keefe was an Irish-born Canadian businessman who, in 1861, purchased Toronto's Victoria Brewery at the corner of Victoria and Gould Streets, a modest operation producing just 1,000 barrels of traditional English ale and stout per year. He knew nothing about brewing when he walked through those doors. What he knew was opportunity, and he seized it completely. In 1879, O'Keefe introduced the large-scale production of lager. In 1898, he was the first brewer in Canada to install a mechanically refrigerated storehouse. He was one of the first to use trucks for beer delivery, the first to build a mechanically refrigerated warehouse, and one of the first to advertise extensively. One man, one brewery, reshaping what Canadian beer looked like and what Canadians expected from it. By the 1890s, O'Keefe was one of the largest brewers of lager beer in Canada. By 1911, a new brewery had been built with an annual capacity of 500,000 barrels, from 1,000 barrels to 500,000, in one lifetime. That is not a brewing story, that is a Canadian story. Then the consolidation machine arrived. E.P. Taylor acquired O'Keefe by 1934, folding it into Canadian Breweries Limited, a conglomerate that had purchased approximately 30 breweries. The company renamed itself Carling O'Keefe in 1973, was bought by Elders IXL of Australia in 1987, and then merged with Molson in 1989. With every handshake and every boardroom, a little more of what Eugene O'Keefe built disappeared. Today, his former brewery is a university arts building, his mansion, a student residence, the ale that carried his name, gone without ceremony. Even so, O'Keefe at least carried a full century of history into its decline. The next beer on our list barely got a decade, a premium all-malt lager that arrived exactly when Canada wasn't ready for it, and vanished before the country ever realized what it had lost. Labatt Classic Canada had a beer that did everything right. All malt, slow brewed, crafted with actual intention, and almost nobody remembers it today. John Labatt Classic was introduced in 1983 as Canada's only national domestic premium beer. Think about that for a moment. In 1983, a country of 25 million beer drinkers, there was exactly one nationally distributed domestic beer that could genuinely call itself premium. One. And Labatt built it from the ground up with a process that most mass-market breweries wouldn't dare attempt. It was Krausenbrewed, slow, low temperature with a secondary fermentation process, and given a longer, cold aging period than standard commercial lagers. Labatt Classic was an all-malt lager, 5% ABV, distinguished by a nifty embossed clear bottle that made it the most visually distinctive beer in any Canadian fridge of the era. It used all malt and a unique blend of Western-grown North American hops, providing a smooth, full-flavored product with a true malt taste that was slightly sweet. Reviewers who tracked it down decades later were genuinely surprised. One wrote that it was a Labatt beer that actually laced the glass, a detail that sounds minor until you realize most adjunct lagers of that period left nothing behind at all. It seemed only logical, once this corporate brewer hit a quality apex like this, that they would discontinue production of their only all-malt beer to make their adjunct lineup seem like the quality plateau. That one line says everything. Labatt Classic wasn't discontinued because it failed. It was discontinued because it made everything else Labatt sold look ordinary by comparison. A premium beer, killed to protect inferior ones. Canada deserved better. And speaking of Canada deserving better, the next beer on our list didn't just deserve better, it earned the top spot in Canada's most competitive beer market, only to be swallowed by the same merger machine that claimed nearly everything on this list. Carling Redcap Ale. Before Thomas Carling ever owned a brewery, he owned a wheelbarrow. He sold his beer from a wheelbarrow on the streets of London, Ontario, pushing it through muddy roads to thirsty soldiers at the local garrison. That is where one of Canada's most beloved ales was born. Not in a boardroom, not in a corporate strategy meeting, on a wheelbarrow in the mud in 1840. Carling Redcap became the most popular brand of beer in Ontario in the 1960s. Ontario, Canada's most populous province, its economic engine, its cultural heartbeat. Redcap didn't just compete for that title, it owned it. Carling's Black and White Lager was introduced in the 1920s and later renamed Black Label Lager in direct contrast to their Redcap Ale. Two beers, two personalities, one brewery carrying all of Ontario on its shoulders. Redcap was an ale in a lager world, amber, malt-forward with genuine hop character that made it stand apart from every thin adjunct competitor on the shelf. Their plant in Natick alone could produce 1.2 million barrels of Redcap Ale and Black Label beer annually. The scale of that operation tells you everything about how seriously Canadians took this beer. Then E.P. Taylor's empire swallowed it whole. Carling O'Keefe merged with Molson Brewery in 1989, closing breweries across 7 provinces. Redcap lost its home, its identity, and its shelf space simultaneously. The brand later disappeared from the market and was unsuccessfully revived in 1994. Today it exists in a faint form under Waterloo Brewing, a name on a label that barely resembles the ale that once ruled Ontario, from a wheelbarrow to the top of Canada's most competitive market. And then, silence. Even so, Redcap Ale at least conquered one province. The final beer on our list conquered an entire culture, the undisputed King of Quebec, the ale that filled hockey arenas and church basements from Montreal to Rimouski, and the brand that a generation of Canadians still reaches for in memory, even when they can no longer find it on the shelf. Molson Export Ale. Some beers are popular, some beers are cultural institutions. Molson Export Ale was never just a drink, it was Quebec's heartbeat in a bottle. In 1903, Herbert Molson and brewmaster John Hyde created Molson Export, an authentic ale brewed in the classic style, developed by founder John Molson himself. A well-balanced, full-bodied golden ale at 5% ABV made using two-row barley, hand-selected Golding and Oregon hops, and an exclusive strain of ale yeast tracing back to the very origins of Molson breweries. That yeast, that specific, irreplaceable yeast. A living thread connecting every glass of export poured in 1903 to every glass poured in 1983. That is not just brewing, that is heritage. In 1957, Molson Export became the official beer of the Montreal Canadiens hockey team, a partnership that lasted until 2015. Think about what that means. Every Stanley Cup run, every overtime goal, every forum eruption from the Rocket Richard era through to Patrick Roy. Molson Export was there, in the hands of the fans, on the boards of the rink, woven into the fabric of the greatest hockey culture on earth. The brand's popularity expanded beyond domestic markets, with exports to the United States contributing to its establishment at Bonn as a reliable ale amid the post-prohibition recovery in North American brewing. Quebec drank it, America wanted it, Canada was proud of it. Then Molson Canadian arrived. The marketing millions shifted. Export was quietly deprioritized, stripped of national distribution, starved of advertising, reduced to a regional afterthought by the same company that built it into a legend. Today, it supports regional popularity, particularly in Quebec, a niche heritage brand in a corporate portfolio that once carried it as a crown jewel. An entire generation of Canadians grew up not knowing this beer existed. That is the real loss. Not the ale, but the memory of what Canadian brewing once was, and what we quietly allowed to slip away. If this brought back memories, subscribe because we are just getting started.